My parents called it a gift. They gathered my sister and me in their living room, my mom's hands trembling as she held up a folder. "We wanted to give you something special," she said. "Something that will keep our family connected forever." The folder contained a timeshare deed. My name was already on it. They'd transferred ownership without telling me, without asking, without explaining what it really meant. I hugged them, confused but grateful. 3 months later, I got a bill for $4,700 in maintenance fees. That's when I started digging. That's when I found the $80,000 debt they'd hidden beneath the gift. Let me rewind. I'm Hannah, a 32-year-old marketing manager living in Chicago. My parents, Linda and Robert, retired to Florida 5 years ago. They'd always been financially responsible, saved carefully, never carried debt, lectured me about credit scores since I was 16. When they moved south, they seemed happy, relaxed. They'd bought a small condo, joined a golf club, made friends. Then 2 years ago, they started changing. Small things at first, skipping visits because they were busy. Then bigger things, asking to borrow money for home repairs. I sent what I could, assuming they'd hit a rough patch. My sister, Jen, did the same. The timeshare gift came out of nowhere. They drove up to Chicago for a weekend, beaming with excitement. At dinner, they made their announcement. "We've been wanting to do something for you girls," Dad said. "Something that will keep our family connected for generations." He pulled out the folder. It was a deed for a timeshare in Orlando, a week every year at a resort called Paradise Cove. My name was listed as the owner. My sister's name was listed as the alternate. "We already took care of everything," Mom added. "It's all legal and done. You just have to enjoy it." I was touched. Confused, but touched. Why would they give me a timeshare? I'd never expressed interest in one. But they seemed so happy, so proud, that I didn't ask questions. I just thanked them. Jen was more skeptical. "What about the fees?" she asked. "Don't timeshares have annual fees?" Dad waved his hand. "Minimal. A few $100 a year. We set up a fund to cover it for the first 5 years." They left Sunday afternoon, hugging us both, looking relieved. I thought they were just happy to give us something special. I had no idea they were running away from a trap they'd built. 3 months later, the letter arrived. Thick envelope, certified mail, from Paradise Cove Resort Management. I opened it expecting a welcome packet. It was a bill. $4,738.50, due in 30 days, for annual maintenance fees and special assessment. I stared at the number, my brain not processing. $4,000? For a week in a timeshare I'd never used? I called my parents immediately. "Mom, I got this bill from Paradise Cove. It says I owe almost $5,000. Silence. Then, "Oh, honey, that must be a mistake. We'll call them and sort it out." "Mom, what's going on? You said the fees were minimal." Another pause. "They are. Usually. There was just a special assessment this year. For renovations. It's a one-time thing." I wanted to believe her. I did. But something in her voice made me uneasy. I called the resort directly. The customer service representative was cheerful and unhelpful. "Ma'am, the maintenance fees are outlined in your ownership documents. You should have received a copy of the contract when you took ownership." "Right. I don't have that contract." "Can you send me another copy?" "We can, but there's a $25 processing fee." I paid the fee. A week later, the contract arrived. It was 47 pages long. I spent the weekend reading every word. What I found made my blood run cold. The minimal fees weren't minimal at all. Base maintenance fees were $1,200 annually, with automatic 5% increases every year. Special assessments could be levied at any time for any reason: capital improvements, emergency repairs, or operational needs. The contract was for perpetuity. Forever. It passed to my heirs. And the gift my parents had given me wasn't a gift at all. It was a transfer of ownership that required their original loan to be paid off. A loan I didn't know existed. I called my sister. "Jen, did you get a bill from Paradise Cove?" "Yes. $4,000. I thought it was a scam. It's not a scam. It's real. And it's worse than we thought. I told her what I'd found. The escalating fees, the perpetuity clause, the hidden loan. Jen was silent for a long moment. Hannah, I think our parents are in trouble. Real trouble. We drove down to Florida together the next weekend. When we arrived at their condo, the transformation was shocking. The place was smaller than I remembered, shabbier. The golf clubs were gone. Mom looked thin, stressed. Dad couldn't meet our eyes. We sat in their tiny living room, and I laid out the contract. Mom, Dad, what is this? Why did you transfer this to me without telling me about the debt? Mom started crying. Dad's face crumpled. We didn't know how bad it was, he whispered. When we bought it, they told us it was an investment, that it would appreciate, that we could sell it any time we wanted. But you couldn't.
No.
When we tried to sell, there were no buyers. The fees kept going up. We took out a loan to pay them, then another loan. By the time we realized what was happening, we were in over $80,000. I felt the world tilt.
$82,000.
And the timeshare company kept calling, threatening. They said if we didn't pay, they'd ruin our credit, take our house, everything. We didn't know what to do. So we thought if we transferred it to you girls, they'd leave us alone. Jen was crying now too. You thought giving us an $80,000 debt would help?
We didn't think of it as debt.
We thought of it as an asset, something valuable we could pass down. We didn't understand the fees, the perpetuity, any of it. They made it sound so good. I sat back, my mind racing. My parents, the people who'd taught me about financial responsibility, had been scammed. And now they'd scammed me, not out of malice, but out of desperation. I need to see everything, I said. All the paperwork, all the loans, all the communications with the timeshare company. Dad nodded, got up, and returned with a box. A cardboard box overflowing with documents. Contracts, bills, threatening letters, loan statements. The evidence of a years-long nightmare. I took the box back to Chicago. I spent weeks going through it, building a timeline, understanding the scope of the fraud. The original sales presentation had been a masterclass in deception. They'd promised lifetime vacations, appreciating assets, easy exit options. None of it was true. The appreciating asset was worthless. The easy exit was impossible. And the lifetime vacations came with fees that increased every year, forever. The loans were the worst part. My parents had taken out multiple loans to pay the fees, each with higher interest rates, each secured against their home. They'd borrowed from their retirement accounts, maxed out credit cards, drained their savings. All to feed a machine that would never stop demanding more. By the time I finished my research, I was furious. Not at my parents, at the company that had preyed on them, at the industry that allowed this to happen, at a system designed to trap people in debt forever. I called a lawyer, a woman named Priya, who specialized in consumer protection and timeshare fraud. She listened to the whole story, then asked me to send her the box.
Give me a week, she said.
A week later, she called back. Hannah, this is bad. But it's also actionable. The original sales presentation made specific promises that weren't true. The loan documents may have violated truth in lending laws. And the transfer of ownership to you without full disclosure could be challenged as fraudulent conveyance. What does that mean? It means we might be able to get you out of this. All of you. But it's going to be a fight. Are you ready for that? I thought about my parents, trapped in debt and shame. I thought about my sister hit with a $4,000 bill she never asked for. I thought about myself, suddenly responsible for an $80,000 nightmare. Yes, I said. I'm ready. So, what happens next? Can we fight a billion-dollar timeshare company? And what will my parents do when they find out I'm suing the people they trusted? Let me know your theories in the comments. Part 2 is where the legal battle begins.
Subscribe.
Priya's retainer was $5,000. I paid it with money I'd been saving for a down payment on a house. It felt like throwing good money after bad, but I also knew it was the only way forward. Over the next month, she and her team dissected every page of that cardboard box.
They found things I'd missed.
loan documents with interest rates that violated state caps, sales presentations with promises that were never put in writing, a pattern of harassment from a timeshare company that bordered on extortion, and buried in the fine print, a clause that might just be our way out. The clause was in the original sales contract, the one my parents had signed 5 years ago. It was buried on page 34 in a section titled Dispute Resolution. Most of it was standard arbitration language, the kind of thing designed to keep disputes out of court. But at the very end, there was a sentence that Priya's paralegal had highlighted. Should the resort fail to maintain the property in accordance with the standards outlined in Appendix C, owners may petition for termination of their ownership without penalty. Appendix C. I flipped to it. It was a list of maintenance standards: pool temperature, room cleanliness, response times for repairs. The kind of vague promises that are almost impossible to enforce. But it was something. Priya sent an investigator to Paradise Cove. He spent a week there, documenting everything.
The pools were cloudy.
The rooms were shabby. The 24-hour maintenance took an average of 48 hours to respond. The gourmet restaurant had been closed for 2 years. By every measurable standard, the resort was failing to meet its own promises. We had our first angle. The second angle was financial. Priya's forensic accountant reviewed the loans my parents had taken out to pay the fees. The interest rates were predatory, in some cases, over 25%. The lender was a company called Resort Finance Solutions, which turned out to be a subsidiary of the same parent company that owned Paradise Cove. They were lending people money to pay fees to themselves, trapping owners in a cycle of debt they could never escape. Usury, Priya said. That's what this is. Charging interest rates that violate state laws. We can challenge the loans themselves. The third angle was the transfer. The deed my parents had signed over to me was technically valid, but the way they'd done it, without disclosure, without my consent, without even telling me, could be challenged as fraudulent conveyance. They transferred an asset with hidden liabilities, Priya explained. That's not a gift. That's a trap. And in some jurisdictions, that's grounds to void the transfer. We were building a case. 3 angles, 3 potential ways out. But each one would take time, money, and a willingness to fight a company with deep pockets and no conscience. I called my parents to update them. The conversation did not go well. A lawsuit. Mom's voice was high and strained. Hannah, you can't sue them. They'll destroy us. Mom, they've already destroyed you. You're $80,000 in debt. Your credit is ruined. You're terrified of answering your phone. What more can they do? They can take the house. They can't take the house if we fight back. That's what they're counting on, that you'll be too scared to stand up to them. Dad got on the line. Hannah, we appreciate what you're trying to do, but this is our mess. We should be the ones to clean it up. You tried to clean it up by dumping it on me and Jen. That didn't work. Now, let me try my way. Silence. Then, quietly. We're sorry. We're so sorry. I know. But sorry doesn't get us out of this. Let me fight. They agreed, reluctantly, to let me proceed. The next few months were a blur of legal filings, depositions, and endless paperwork. The timeshare company's lawyers were aggressive, filing motions to dismiss, challenging every piece of evidence, trying to wear us down. But Priya was relentless. She countered each motion, deposed each witness, built a case that grew stronger with every hearing. Then came the breakthrough. One of the timeshare company's former sales representatives, a man named David, reached out through a mutual contact. He'd quit 6 months earlier, unable to stomach the lies he was forced to tell. He agreed to meet with us. David was in his 40s, tired-looking, with the haunted expression of someone carrying a heavy secret. He told us everything. The sales presentations were scripted, he said. We were trained to lie. To tell people the timeshare was an investment, that it would appreciate, that they could sell at any time. None of it was true. We knew it wasn't true. But we were paid commissions on every sale, and the more you sold, the higher your commission rate. People were making 6 figures a year, lying to retirees. Did you ever tell anyone the truth? Priya asked.
No.
If you did, you were fired. I watched it happen to a guy who couldn't keep lying. He lasted 3 months. David had kept records. Emails, training manuals, recordings of sales meetings. He handed over a thumb drive with everything. This is gold, Priya said after he left. Documentation of intentional fraud. If we can get this admitted, the case is over. The timeshare company's lawyers fought to suppress David's evidence, arguing it was stolen, privileged, inadmissible. But the judge ruled in our favor. The recordings were allowed. The training manuals were allowed. The emails were allowed. Suddenly, we had leverage. The company's lawyers approached us about a settlement. They offered to release my parents from the remaining debt, about $60,000, in exchange for dropping the case and signing a non-disclosure agreement. Priya presented the offer. It's not nothing. They'd be free. You'd be free. No more payments, no more harassment. But you'd have to stay silent about everything you've learned. I thought about David, about the other victims, about the thousands of families trapped in similar nightmares. Staying silent felt like betrayal. What if we don't settle? I asked. Then we go to trial. We present the evidence. We try to win not just for your parents, but for everyone. But it's a risk. Juries are unpredictable, and the company has endless resources to appeal. So what do? Take the settlement and free my parents, or go to trial and fight for something bigger? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Part 3 is the decision and the consequences.
Subscribe.
I took 48 hours to decide. I barely slept, barely ate, just paced my apartment, running through every possible outcome in my head. The settlement offer sat on my coffee table, a single page that could end everything. My parents would be free. No more debt, no more harassment, no more shame. But thousands of other families would remain trapped, still paying, still suffering, still believing the lies. I thought about David, the whistleblower who'd risked his career to help us. I thought about the retirees who'd lost their savings. I thought about the next victim, the one who hadn't yet signed. I called my sister Jen first. She'd been following the case from a distance, too overwhelmed by her own life to dive into the details. But now she listened as I laid out the choice. $60,000 in debt gone.
Just like that.
Mom and Dad would be free. And the catch? Jen asked. We sign a non-disclosure. We can never talk about what happened. Never warn anyone else. Never help other victims. Jen was quiet for a moment. Hannah, I hate this. I hate that they put us in this position. But Mom and Dad are our parents. They made a terrible mistake, but they're still our parents. Don't we owe it to them to take the deal? What about what we owe to everyone else? The people who haven't been offered settlements? The ones who can't afford lawyers? That's not our responsibility. We're not superheroes. We're just two women trying to save our family. I called my parents next. Mom answered on the first ring, her voice trembling. Hannah, what's happening? Have you heard anything? Mom, I need to talk to you and Dad. Together. They got on the line. I explained the settlement offer. The silence on the other end was deafening.
$62,000, Dad whispered. Gone.
Just like that.
Yes.
But we'd have to sign a non-disclosure. We could never talk about what happened. Never warn anyone else. Hannah, we don't care about warning anyone else. We care about getting out of this nightmare.
Take the deal.
Please. I felt torn in two. Part of me wanted to take the deal, to end this, to give my parents peace. But another part, the part that had spent months learning about the industry, about the victims, about the scale of the fraud, couldn't let it go. I need to think, I said. I'll call you tomorrow. The next morning, I called Priya. What happens if we reject the settlement and go to trial? She was quiet for a moment. We present our evidence. We put David on the stand. We try to convince a jury that this company engaged in systematic fraud. If we win, we could get not just your parents' debt erased, but potentially damages. Punitive damages. Enough to make a real impact. And if we lose? Then your parents are still on the hook for the debt. Maybe more if the company countersues for legal fees. It's a risk. I thought about my parents, about their age, their health, their fragile peace. Could I put them through a trial? Could I risk losing everything? I have another option, Priya said. We could try to negotiate a different kind of settlement. One that frees your parents, but doesn't require silence. One that lets you use what we've learned to help others.
How?
We ask for a public statement, an admission of wrongdoing, even if it's carefully worded. And we ask them to fund a consumer protection fund, money that could be used to help other victims. It's a long shot, but it's worth trying. I agreed. Priya drafted a counteroffer. Release my parents from all debt, plus $50,000 in damages, plus a public statement acknowledging the deceptive practices, plus $200,000 to establish a consumer protection fund. In exchange, we dropped the lawsuit. The timeshare company's lawyers rejected it within 48 hours. Their counteroffer was even worse than the first. Release my parents from debt, but no damages, no statement, no fund, and a stricter non-disclosure. They're not going to budge, Priya said. They know they have leverage. Your parents are tired. You're tired. They're betting you'll take whatever they offer just to make it stop. She was right. I was tired. So tired. I called my parents one last time. I'm going to take the deal, I said. You'll be free. Mom burst into tears. Dad kept saying thank you over and over. I hung up feeling hollow. The settlement was finalized 3 weeks later. My parents signed their part, I signed mine, and the debt disappeared. The timeshare company sent a letter confirming that my parents' obligation was satisfied in full. They also sent a non-disclosure agreement, which I signed with a heavy heart. My parents cried with relief. They invited me to Florida for a celebration dinner. I went, hugged them, smiled for photos. But inside, I felt like I'd betrayed something. Betrayed David, who'd risked everything to help us. Betrayed the other victims, who'd never know what we'd learned. Betrayed myself. Then, 6 months later, I got a call from a reporter. She was investigating timeshare fraud and had heard rumors about a whistleblower, a lawsuit, a settlement. She wanted to talk. I can't, I said. I signed a non-disclosure. I understand. But if you could point me in the right direction, off the record, I might be able to find what I need without you breaking your agreement. So what do? Do I help her, risking legal action from the timeshare company? Or do I stay silent, honoring the deal that freed my parents but left so many others trapped? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Part 4 is about the choice between silence and justice.
Subscribe.
The reporter's name was Sarah Chin. She worked for a major investigative journalism outlet, the kind that had brought down corporations and exposed government corruption. She'd been looking into timeshare fraud for months, collecting stories from victims across the country. My parents' case, she said, had come up in her research: anonymous tips, court records, whispers about a whistleblower named David. She didn't need me to break my non-disclosure. She just needed confirmation. A nod. A direction. A way to connect the dots without me saying a word. I sat across from her in a quiet coffee shop, my heart pounding, my future hanging in the balance. I can't tell you anything, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I signed an agreement. Sarah nodded slowly. I understand. I'm not asking you to tell me anything. I'm just going to talk for a while, and you can listen. If I happen to get something right, you can nod. If I get something wrong, you can shake your head. That's not breaking your agreement. That's just nonverbal communication. I looked around the coffee shop, half expecting a timeshare lawyer to jump out from behind the counter. This feels dangerous. It is dangerous. But what they're doing is more dangerous. To thousands of families. To retirees who've lost everything. To people like your parents. She started talking. She knew about the sales presentations, the lies about appreciation, the hidden fees. She knew about the loan company, Resort Finance Solutions, and its connection to the parent corporation. She knew about David, not his name, but his existence. A former sales rep who'd quit and disappeared. Did David give you documents? She asked. I didn't nod. I didn't shake my head. I just looked at her. She smiled slightly. Okay, let's say, hypothetically, that someone had documents. Emails, training manuals, recordings. If those documents were to find their way to me, I could use them, anonymously, without ever revealing where they came from. I thought about the thumb drive. It was still in my possession, a copy of everything David had given us. Technically, it belonged to the case, but the case was settled. The documents were in a gray area. Hypothetically, I said carefully, if such documents existed, they might be hard to find. They might be in a safe place. They might be accessible to someone who knew where to look. Sarah's eyes lit up. I understand. And if someone were to, say, leave those documents in a public place, a library, maybe they might be discovered by anyone. No names, no connections, no paper trail. We talked for another hour, circling around the edges of what I knew and what she needed. By the end, we had a plan. The next day, I went to the public library. I rented a study room, locked the door, and copied the entire contents of the thumb drive onto a new, anonymous USB drive. Then I left that drive in a book on the third floor, a book about consumer protection, fittingly enough. I texted Sarah the location. Third floor, section 342, The Consumer's Guide to Legal Rights. Page 142. 2 hours later, she texted back. Found it. The investigation was back on. Over the next 6 months, Sarah published a series of articles that rocked the timeshare industry. She used the documents to expose the fraudulent sales practices, the predatory loans, the systematic exploitation of vulnerable retirees. Other victims came forward. Class action lawsuits were filed. State attorneys general opened investigations. The parent company's stock plummeted. And through it all, my name never appeared. I was anonymous, a ghost in the story. My parents, of course, had no idea. They were just relieved to be free, enjoying their retirement, trying to forget the nightmare. I didn't tell them what I'd done. I couldn't. They'd be terrified of retaliation, of the company coming after us again. But I knew. And David knew. And Sarah knew. We'd done something real. Then one day I got a letter. Certified mail from a law firm I didn't recognize. My heart stopped as I opened it. It was a subpoena. The timeshare company, in response to the class action lawsuits, was demanding all documents related to my parents' case, including any copies of materials provided by David. They'd found out about the leak. They were coming after me. I called Priya immediately. She read the subpoena and was quiet for a long moment. This is bad, Hannah. They're claiming you violated the non-disclosure by providing documents to the reporter. If they can prove it, you could be liable for damages.
Millions potentiali.
But I didn't provide anything. I left them in a library. Sarah found them on her own. That's a distinction a jury might not care about. You had a duty to protect those documents. You failed to do so. I felt the walls closing in. My parents were free, but I was trapped. The very documents that had exposed the fraud were now being used against me. What do? We fight. We argue that the documents were never covered by the non-disclosure because they weren't yours, they were David's. And David never signed anything. We argue that the public interest outweighs any contractual obligation. We bring in Sarah as a witness. We make this about exposing the truth, not about punishing you. It was a risky strategy, but it was the only one we had. So, what happens now? Do I win this fight, or does the timeshare company destroy me too? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The final part is about the trial, the truth, and the price of justice.
Subscribe.
The courtroom was the same one where we'd settled my parents' case, but everything else was different. This time, I was the defendant. The timeshare company's lawyers sat at the plaintiff's table, surrounded by binders and laptops, ready to prove I'd violated my agreement. Priya sat beside me, calm and focused. In the gallery, I spotted Sarah, the reporter, and David, the whistleblower. And in the back row, looking terrified and proud at the same time, were my parents. They'd driven up from Florida as soon as they heard. "We're with you," Mom had said. Whatever happens. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The timeshare company's lawyers painted me as a liar, a thief, a woman who'd broken her word for 15 minutes of fame. They played recordings of my settlement signing, where I'd agreed to the non-disclosure. They called expert witnesses to testify about the damages I'd caused. But Priya had a strategy. She didn't try to deny that documents had been leaked. Instead, she focused on why. "Your Honor," she said in her opening statement, "the plaintiff wants you to believe this is about a broken contract. But it's not. It's about a broken system. A system that allowed a company to defraud thousands of families, including my client's parents. A system that used non-disclosure agreements to silence victims. A system that my client had the courage to expose." The first witness was David. He testified about the years of lies, the pressure to deceive, the moment he decided he couldn't do it anymore. He testified about giving me the documents, about hoping they'd be used to stop the fraud. Under cross-examination, the company's lawyers tried to paint him as a disgruntled ex-employee with an axe to grind. But David held firm. The second witness was Sarah. She testified about her investigation, about finding the documents in the library, about the articles that had exposed the truth. "I've been a journalist for 20 years, she said. "These documents were the most damning evidence of corporate fraud I've ever seen. Publishing them was not just my job, it was my duty." The company's lawyers tried to force her to reveal her source, but she invoked reporters' privilege. The judge allowed it. The third witness was my mother. She walked to the stand slowly, her hands trembling, her eyes wet. Under Priya's gentle questioning, she told the story of the timeshare purchase, the lies, the debt, the shame. She described the moment they decided to transfer it to me, thinking it was a gift, not understanding the trap they were setting. "We didn't know," she whispered. "We thought we were giving our daughter something special. Instead, we gave her a nightmare." The courtroom was silent. Even the company's lawyers looked uncomfortable. My mother turned to face the plaintiff's table. "You took everything from us. Our savings, our peace of mind, our dignity. And when my daughter tried to stop you from doing it to others, you tried to destroy her too. I hope this court sees you for what you really are." She stepped down to scattered applause from the gallery. The judge banged her gavel for quiet. The final witness was me. Priya walked me through my journey, the shock of the bill, the discovery of the debt, the fight to free my parents, the settlement, the reporter, the documents. She asked me one question at the end. "Hannah, why did you do it? Why did you risk everything?" I looked at my parents, at David, at Sarah. I thought about all the families I'd never meet, the victims who might never know why their burdens suddenly felt lighter. "Because silence helps the guilty," I said. And I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent while this company kept hurting people. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they filed back in, I held my breath. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, handed the verdict to the judge. "On the charge of breach of contract, how do you find?" "Not guilty." I felt the world tilt. Priya squeezed my arm. "On the counterclaim of public interest disclosure, how do you find?" "We find that the defendant's actions were protected by the public interest doctrine. The documents revealed ongoing fraud that harmed thousands of consumers. The non-disclosure agreement cannot be enforced to conceal such harm." The courtroom erupted. My parents were crying. David was cheering. Sarah was already on her phone, typing furiously. The judge banged her gavel for order. "The plaintiff's case is dismissed. The defendant is awarded costs and reasonable attorney's fees. This court finds that the timeshare company's practices, as revealed in this trial, constitute a pattern of fraud and deception. I am referring this matter to the state attorney general for further investigation." It was over. I had won. The aftermath was overwhelming. The state attorney general launched a full investigation into the timeshare company. Class action lawsuits multiplied. New laws were proposed to regulate the industry. My parents' story became a cautionary tale, featured in news articles and documentaries. And I became an accidental advocate, speaking at consumer protection conferences, testifying before legislative committees, fighting for the victims who couldn't fight for themselves. The micro-niche here isn't just timeshare fraud. It's about the courage to speak truth to power, even when it costs you everything. It's about the difference between legal justice and moral justice. It's about a daughter who refused to let her parents' nightmare define their legacy. My parents are doing well now. They're still in Florida, still retired, still grateful. We talk every week. They tell me they're proud of me, and for the first time, I believe them. David started a nonprofit to help timeshare victims. Sarah won a Pulitzer for her investigation. And I'm writing a book about the trap, the fight, the victory, about the thousands of families still trapped and the work still to be done. Have you or someone you love ever been caught in a predatory financial scheme? How did you fight back? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's build a community of survivors, advocates, and truth-tellers. And if this story of hidden debt, family betrayal, and hard-won justice resonated with you, share it. Sometimes, the worst gift can become the greatest mission. Thanks for listening.